New Level Cap Podcast is a show about fun, friends, game design, and all things otherwise. Your hosts are Marco DeSantos and Brad Telton of Level 99 Games. I'm Chris Solis, your producer, and without further ado, please enjoy the show.
Can you snap with both of your fingers? Wow, I can only snap with one. Do 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 do. Do 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 do. It's time for the podcast, the Level Cap Podcast with Marco and Brad, the Level Cap Podcast. Do 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 do. 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 That's the intro. That's the we did it.
My contribution is now snapping to the beat.
Yeah. This is the entire podcast now. Welcome to the Addams Family Podcast with me, your host, Marco DeSantos, also known as the Mechanic Critic, and with me is my wonderful, totally Gomez friend.
Totally Gomez?
I mean, Gomez is like the coolest character in that show.
Okay. Let's say, Markisha. That's Tagalog.
Did you just call me I'm done. Markisha? I quit. I'm leaving this podcast. Markisha?
I don't know.
I'm done. Hello, Brad.
Yeah, you should be done. I would quit after that.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm so happy to have Brad back. Brad's been a bit busy over the past few days. I think you were sick last time.
Yeah, it feels like it's been forever.
Yeah, you were. Well, I had Chris on for Evo, and then of course I had Chris on for the Shovel Knight one. So now we're back, and I heard that you were sick recently, so I hope you're okay.
Yeah, I was pretty sick. I was laid up all last week on Monday, but I'm much better now. I'm getting over my cold. I'm just getting a lot of work done on BattleCon, Wanderers, and Devastation. So if you haven't checked it out yet, you should check out my blogs. I've been posting every week on the main website, but you can read it a few weeks early on the Kickstarter page. So if you are a backer, or if you just remember to go over to the Kickstarter page and see our progress, we're making a lot of cool progress.
Yeah,
things are going really well.
I saw the sleeves; they looked really nice. And I'm also really into the updates you did to the dungeon mode. Is that what we call it? Not Battle Quest anymore?
I mean, it's Battle Quest dungeon mode. That's, they are the same thing, right?
Yeah, that's fair. Okay. Yeah, I'm really into these updates. Yeah, and I've been testing them myself, so it's been really fun. But Brad, that's not what this episode is about. We were just kind of like, introducing this topic. Earlier on, we were doing this Addams Family thing because obviously we were role playing.
Because you can't
them.
snap.
Well, no. Okay. Number one, I can snap with one hand. All right, I can snap with one hand. Okay, but not the other. See, look, this is the one. The hand that doesn't work. This is the hand that works.
Okay. I see.
All right.
I don't understand how it's possible. Like, are you missing a finger on the other hand or something?
No, it's just that my dominant hand is just better at doing it. That's really the answer.
That's pretty wild.
Yeah, okay. It's pretty wild. Maybe I have some sort of disease that I don't know about. Who knows? But at the end of the day, the big thing here is that we were role-playing the Addams Family because this episode's all about RPGs. So we have a question from a listener. Let me read it out for you. As someone who loves RPGs and is making a few of his own, what kind of basic systems do you like best? And what inspired the unique system you used for Mystic Empyrean? That's a lot of things to unpack. Yeah. But let's start off with the basics.
Yeah, I guess we could do it bit by bit. So RPG stands for several different things. Our most common parlance, it's rocket-propelled grenade. So these are games that you play using rocket-propelled grenades.
I'm pretty sure it means rated PG. It's a game that you can't play unless you have an adult supervising you.
Yeah. When I was a kid, I actually thought that RPG stood for rated PG. When I read, I've read, I don't know, Nintendo Power. And they just called it an RPG without explaining what that meant. And I was like, what does that mean? Does that mean it's rated PG? That's a movie rating. But maybe that's what it means.
I can't play this game unless my mom's here.
Yeah. I was told better eventually. But, kids
so what did they tell you better eventually? What does RPG
They were
mean?
like, those are called role-playing games. Not
I see.
rated PG games.
Yeah. Okay. So role-playing games are The term role-playing games become really muddy over the past few years of games
Yeah.
because anything with a progression system where you earn experience and level up is now just a role-playing game. Like Dark Souls is
Yeah.
a role-playing game, or like
I mean, any game where you are controlling a single character avatar is technically a role-playing game because you're playing that character's role in the world, and the world's acting separately. And that'd be opposed to, say, like a simulation game where, like SimCity, where you just build a city, or something else where you're, more of a controlling entity.
Yeah, I guess. But at the end of the day, right? Like if you're a controlling entity, you're playing the role of a god, right? Like
what we would understand, you and me, as RPGs, as role-playing games, would be storytelling games where the players control a single character within the world of the story.
Yes. And often in the context of this show or episode, at least, we're going to be talking about tabletop role-playing games. So maybe this is the term that kind of makes it more clear. It's those pen and paper things. You play the character, you do a silly voice or not, and then you describe what your character does via actions, as set forth by the game's rule set. But still, it's not a thing. It's not like playing God of War, right? Like, because in God of War, it's like you control the character using a controller and all this stuff. It's not the same thing, right? Because the main goal of God of War isn't to tell a great story. It's to pilot your Kratos mech so that it goes through all the story beats. But in a role-playing game,
I guess to some extent, you kind of there's a thing to it, because when you're the author of this story, and I'm a game designer and I'm building this game, and I'm inviting people to participate in the story, that means that that they are going to be stepping through the story that I'm building, which is kind of the same thing that a GM is doing to a player character. It's a little less open-ended.
That's
but
true.
You might say that the things that I, as a player character, can do within this world are analogous to a tabletop RPG. I mean, the line gets a lot more muddy when you look at something like Fallout, for example, or the Shadowrun games, or Divinity. These games where, you're in a closed world, but you really are controlling this character, and you can make choices and go places and do things. The story doesn't adapt totally to everything you do, but the choices that are presented to you allow you to fork the story. So I think that trying to put too narrow of a definition on this probably is a bit counterproductive.
Yeah,
but we can
fair.
say, for the purpose of our discussion, and for the purpose of the question, I'm pretty sure, that we're talking about tabletop role-playing games where one or more players get together and tell a story.
Yeah, pretty sure. So this is your Dungeons and Dragons, your Fate systems, your 13th Age. Insert any number of RPGs here, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. So let's move on to the next meat of the question. What are some RPG systems or games that you enjoy or you're excited about, Brad? Can you tell us, like, maybe 2 or 3 and why you're excited about that? Then maybe I'll talk about my own.
Yeah. I've been on a bit of an RPG kick recently, and I've picked up a lot of RPGs. Most recently, I picked up the Chubo's Miraculous Wish-Granting Engine, or maybe it's Chubo's Marvelous Wish-Granting Engine, by author Jenna Moran. Is one of my favorite RPG authors of all time. Actually wrote my favorite RPG, Nobilis, which I was introduced to back in college. Mm-hmm. Another one that I have really gotten into reading is Shadows of Estrid. This is like a huge world-building project that these guys have done. It's got a soundtrack, it's got a cookbook, it's got a couple of novels. The world is really expansive.
Yeah, I think you talked about how immersive that entire world is, because they sent you stuff that, like, is completely meaningless to the game, right? Like, it's just a cookbook. I mean, like, sure.
All kinds of wild stuff. So I'm reading through that, enjoying that. I got an RPG for The Expanse, which is a book series that my wife and my friend Chad both enjoy quite a lot. And I'm hoping to GM that for them at some point to run a small game of The Expanse. So
what's
there's a lot of role-playing games I'm playing these. It's a near-future science fiction. So sublight space travel.
Sublight space travel. Interesting.
Mm-hmm. Do you know that means? Like, you're still bounded to the solar system. It's still kind of human centric.
It's kind of like we can travel from Jupiter and back, but we're not going to alternate dimension Castrol 6, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so those are some games you're interested in. Like, what about the systems, right? Like, I assume people are talking about like D20 systems or resolution systems and stuff like this.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of systems, and even though most systems are linked by their dice, I feel like a better way to categorize systems is based on the focus the system lends. So, or even the number of stats in the system. Well, to give you an example, a game like Dungeons and Dragons is very tactical, very crunchy, and more than half the rules in the game are how to resolve combat. Whereas in a game, say like Noblesse, the rules in combat are whoever has the higher physical strength wins. Try not to get into combat if you're weak.
Yeah,
so
I think I understand what you're talking about. It's like I've been watching a lot of the Adventure Zone, and they use an RPG system called Monster of the Week, which is a Powered by the Apocalypse game.
Apocalypse is super popular these days.
Yeah, it is, and that thing is way more narrative focused than like something like D&D. Because when you create a character in a Powered by the Apocalypse game, like 80% of all of your abilities are totally not combat related at all, right? And in Dungeons and Dragons, like 90% of what makes your character is literally just combat skills, right?
Yeah, because this is a hack and slash game. We go to the dungeon, we fight monsters, we take their stuff. It's kind of the core game loop. Whereas the games like Apocalypse Engine, and they can be combat oriented, but they're mostly about the storytelling. And some of your actions you can take are actually narrative actions that have real mechanical effects on the way the story plays out.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, so these games really are built around the storytelling side of things. And I think that's a better way to categorize if a system is narrative focused or if it's tactical focused.
Okay.
There are even a few RPGs that are crafting focused.
Oh, that's really cool. I think there's a monster hunting RPG that essentially is Monster Hunter, the RPG. And I think they do have a crafting system in that one. So that's interesting.
Yeah, I'm actually in a Persona RPG right now.
What?
That's based in the Monsters and Other Childish Things. Is an RPG system where you kind of get a pet monster that goes around and does stuff for you. And so
that's your
there's a hack
Persona.
for that makes Persona. And so I'm in a game of that right now.
I'm so jealous, Brad. Here's a fun fact. Have you been keeping up with D&D news recently?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so they just released 2 playtest classes to the masses, subclasses to the monk and the barbarian. Let's ignore the barbarian. The monk one is called Way of the Astral Self subclass. And I kid you not, the description is you can focus your inner ki to project an astral form of your inner warrior, reflecting your true combat prowess. And a lot of the abilities are about manifesting this astral projection of yourself that has different characteristics based on your personality or whatever.
Yeah, so personas.
Or JoJo stands.
Or stands. Yeah, that's true.
Because personas are just JoJo stands, okay?
I wonder if there's a JoJo RPG. I'm sure there is.
There
This is the thing about RPGs that I've learned. There's a role-playing game for everything. And also, the point one, there's a role-playing game for everything. Point 2, nobody has actually ever played it.
It's true.
True. Just look up like the Sheryl Crow RPG. There's so many ridiculous games.
Oh, there's a really weird one-page RPG where the concept is you and your party are all Carly Rae Jepsen fans, and you're on a heist to try and steal Carly Rae Jepsen's new album from a store before it gets sold to the masses.
I see.
It's so hyper specific. Like why? Why does it have to be specifically?
I think those are the best. Like you get something that's very specific. Honestly, I find RPGs pretty hard to play, and I think there are a couple reasons that they get to be really difficult to take to the table. One, you have to have a dedicated group that's got to meet every week. Right?
Oh, it's
With
true.
Board gaming, you can drop in, you can drop out, whatever. We all have different schedules. We're all adults. It's hard to find time to meet up with your group once you're out in the world.
But that's the problem, right? Like in an RPG, especially in a long form one, not a one-shot kind of RPG, Like you have to meet up to keep the story going. And then if one person drops, then it's like you can't even continue the story until everybody's there, right? It's rough.
Yeah, exactly. So that's pretty tough. Another thing about the RPGs is that they are long. Like, the rulebook for a board game is typically in the, 20 pages tops, and that's with a lot of diagrams. And these RPGs might have 250 pages plus of just solid text that you have to read before you can even start.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
like,
it's true.
They're huge. And look at Dungeons & Dragons. That's 3 books that you have to read to run a D&D game. One that you have to read to play it. And it's the one that you have to read as a player is 350 pages long. So it's not really a wonder that people don't read this kind of stuff very much.
Yeah, usually they just like usually when you play Dungeons and Dragons with an experienced DM, they go like, ignore the book. Here's a crib sheet, and what kind of character do you want to make?
Yeah, exactly.
And they kind of obfuscate that from the player, right? Like they just go like, what kind of character?
Consider even like a video game where they hand you, like your character walks out of the world and it's like, use the left stick to run, use the right trigger to shoot, A button to jump. Okay, have fun.
Yeah.
You can figure the rest out yourself. Like the game, the open world of the game teaches you how to play.
That's true. Like in Mega Man. Like that one video where they analyze Mega Man X's stage 1-1 and the intro stage to Mega Man, and they basically explain that like this is a tutorial level that doesn't have to tell you what the buttons do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's true, right? It just puts you in the game and then just creates the world in such a way
you're in a safe space where you pretty much can't lose doing all these things.
Yeah.
And then in classic Mega Man style, they introduce you to an enemy, and then immediately you meet that enemy in a safe space, and you meet that enemy in a dangerous space.
So true. Mega Man.
But anyway,
yeah.
RPGs don't generally build up like that. They're very heavily front loaded. And I'm guilty of this too in my own role-playing work. But when I wanted to write a couple RPGs, and that's one reason I've been doing all this research and reading all these books. And as I read the books, what I'm learning is the real problem is that you have to read the books. So
I see. By reading the books, I realized that reading the books is the problem.
Yeah. So I think if I'm going to improve the genre or reinvent the genre in any way, it has to be to eliminate the books.
That would be really interesting. So how would you do that?
I would start players off with something very simple and probably have to give them some kind of technology solution. So, for example, say you're the GM and you have a module, all right, and you put your players into it. They start taking actions. Whenever they encounter something they don't understand, then there's like a 1-minute tutorial. Like, hey, here's a door. Here's how to make a skill check to unlock the door.
Ooh,
that kind of thing. But you don't even know the rules until you reach these points.
That's really
same thing. Like
interesting.
Yeah,
Brad, because
I think
I'm
we got
starting to think
a little bit, Marco. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. No, it's fine. But now I'm thinking about it. Why isn't there an RPG game, tabletop RPG game, that has like contextual tutorials like a video game? Like, why isn't there one of those things?
I think people have experimented with doing some of the early D&D modules that way, like some of the starter modules. It's just D&D is such a heavy system, and honestly, the real problem is that the book is the product. So I need to make the book critical so that everybody has to buy the book, right?
Mm-hmm,
Whereas if I make an RPG that has no actual product, then I might have trouble selling that RPG. I might have trouble making back money for all the time that I invested in it, right?
That's fair.
If I make an app is like $5 or $6. Maybe I can get 15 or 20 for a premium app. But if I make a book, I could get $40 for 3 books. That's $120 per user.
Yeah, that's fair.
Right. So people definitely want the physical product.
Yeah, that's true.
At least publishers want the physical product. I think there's a possibility, though, because things like Roll20 are getting more popular. People are playing more of these games online. If you built a game that was optimized for online, say even character creation, right? You open up the character sheet, and the game gives you, 3 choices of swords, 3 choices of hats, the races that your character has available to them, the stats that you can get, spread out, just kind of like a regular, Dark Souls or Elder Scrolls type character creation. And you create your character, and then you're off into the world.
Yeah, I really like that. I really want a world where actually getting into an RPG doesn't require me, the GM, to set up for a week just reading the rule books.
Mm-hmm.
That would be cool. That would actually be really nice.
Well, they do make games like this, like games that are very, very short.
Uh-huh.
So if you look up, there's like a book called Game Poems, 20 Game Poems or something, and they're like short RPGs that you can play in a sitting. Most of them are, very serious, like artsy kind of games. They won't give you this big, exciting adventure. They're more like, your three friends sitting on the porch talking about days gone by, and then you role play that out. And at the end of the game, one of you has to shoot the other one, and whoever shoots first ends the adventure.
That's wild and really
but
cool.
They're weird like that, yeah.
That's cool. Oh, speaking of which, we haven't even mentioned one of my favorite RPGs that I have played. Power Play. Huh?
Power Play.
Yeah,
Power Play.
Power Play is really good because I feel like it addressed a lot of the issues I had with role-playing games. Number one, it doesn't have a dedicated GM, right? So it's absolutely great because everybody just gets to play and nobody feels left out. Number two, easy to get into because literally Power Play is just, here's the MacGuffin, here are your objectives, here's what you are, deal with it, right? And that's it. Like, there's nothing else, right?
I think that if we went back and we really did Power Play again, I think we could make a really big deal of it. I think we could make it great.
Yeah, Power Play is great. I mean, have I told you this story? So actually in high school, when Power Play was still called Skullduggery and it was in playtesting, me and my playtest friends all played Power Play, right? Mm-hmm. And the funny thing was, there was a school sports fest going on, and they were like, "Oh, Marco, you and your friends have to play in this sporting event, blah, 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 blah." And then we were like, okay, but I also have the playtest module for Power Play. And then they're like, we want to play Power Play. And then I'm like, okay, so here's the plan. We lose the sports fest on purpose.
And then go play Power Play?
Oh, yes, we did.
Wow. I know that John would be honored to hear that.
Yeah, so we purposely lost an entire sporting event just so that we could go play this RPG game. It's great.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah. All right. So I think we'll take a short break and then we'll come back and we'll talk a little bit more about Mystic Empyrean, the last half of this question, where we talk about what Mystic Empyrean is and what inspired Brad to make it. Brad, take us to the break.
To the break.
Huzzah!
Get your copy of Cell Swords Olympus for $5 only this week. Enter the home of the gods for an epic head-to-head strategic battle for glory. Get on over to level99games.com/sellswordsdeal quickly before we run out.
That was like huzzah, but backwards?
Really?
I don't know. I tried.
That sounded like the work of an enemy stand.
Oh. Nani? Oh my gosh. It's funny because in escalators in the Philippines, they're trying to enforce this thing where on one side you walk and on the other side you stand, right?
Right. Okay, that's pretty standard.
Yeah, no, because in my country that wasn't standard for a long time. Everybody just stood, right? So now all the elevators have the word stand printed on one side. It's just the word stand, right? And I
see. This must be a less common word in your country because we see stand all over the place.
No, it's not a word people often use in conversation. So it's really funny because now it's like I see the word stand and I remember that one scene in JoJo where he literally almost dies on an escalator.
I see.
So it makes me laugh every time.
I remember that.
Yeah. All right. So we're back from the break. JoJo memes aside, let's talk a little bit about Mystic Empyrean. Brad, what is Mystic Empyrean aside from sounding like Imperial?
Yeah. So Mystic Empyrean is a game where you are an Eidolon, an immortal force of nature, rebuilding the world which was destroyed in a great calamity untold ages ago. So you adventure. You discover fragments of the old world, you restore them to life, and then you explore those places that you've rebuilt to resolve their problems and to also acquire new shards of the world. So the world grows as you build it. And remember when I said there's some RPGs that are actually about crafting? This was a role-playing game that was the idea being after you finish, you will have a finished world that you yourselves have built as the players through your heroic deeds.
Yes. And speaking of heroic deeds, I think your crafting focus is also like literally everywhere. It's not just like what you do in the world is crafting. Like how you make your character is also essentially crafting, right?
Yeah. It doesn't all happen at character creation. In fact, at the end of a game session, you will talk to the other players, you pass your character sheets around, and the other players will give you experience based on what traits you role-played. And then as you get experience in those traits, you level them up, and the traits give you new powers. So the powers come from the way that you role-play, not necessarily from choices you make arbitrarily during character creation.
Yep. So this is how I've sold Mystic Empyrean to so many people. It's like, if you roleplay like an angry warmonger, it's very likely you gain experience in fire, right? And in fire element, you get powers like your blood is lava, or you're constantly angry. You can make things explode and stuff like that, right? Like
there are all kinds of things. Like there's really like any power that you could imagine is somewhere in this game, and there are negative powers too. Like if you're cowardly, you'll turn into like a gingerbread person, basically. If you are somebody who folds easily under pressure, your character will become made of glass. And so all the Eidolon characters are not human. They're like strange elemental beings, kind of really godlike concepts.
Yeah.
You can't be killed. So combat is kind of just how do we choose to resolve situations.
Yeah.
I think that was probably the weakest part of the original edition was the combat system, or lack thereof.
Yeah, it's really interesting because in Mystic Empyrean, like you can obviously tell the focus of Mystic Empyrean is very different from the focus of something like D&D. Because again, like in the Mystic Empyrean rule set, there's no combat, but there is an entire section dedicated to emotional scarring. So, right? Like, because in Mystic Empyrean, like when your best friend stabs you in the back with a knife, it's not that the knife hurts you, it's because you feel so betrayed by your friend that your character takes damage, right? So it's really interesting.
The things that you are bound to, the thing that you invest your character's sort of emotional currency in, those are the things that can hurt you. And that's something that's an element that was very heavily, I would almost say, borrowed from Nobilis.
Oh, interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, so I was very heavily inspired by that game when I did Empyrean, whereas that game is more like modern fantasy. It's very, I would say, American Gods or Anansi Boys. It's that kind of universe.
It's Percy Jackson, essentially.
Yeah,
right?
Very Percy Jackson. Where then Imperial is more of a high fantasy world-building game.
Yeah, super high fantasy.
Same kind of idea, but shifted in a very different direction.
Yeah, I really like...
very different resolution as well.
Oh yeah, for sure. Let's talk about the resolution system. So from what I remember, essentially, the resolution system in Mystic Empyrean, it's kind of like how your players are godlike beings who can influence the world that they're in, right? So like there's like a certain pool of elements in the world, and your actions either take or add new elements to that world. And depending on certain actions that you take, they are assigned to an element, and certain elements make for opposing rolls against other elements, right? Like if you take
there's an element wheel, right?
Yeah.
And each element has elements itself, and elements that are aligned with it, and elements that are opposed, and elements that are directly opposed. And so when I decide to do something aggressive and violent, that's a fire action. And I flip a card from the deck, which is based on the place that we're in, the world that we've builds this deck. And if I reveal fire or one of the things next to it, I would succeed. If I reveal one of the things opposed or directly opposed, then I would fail. And that's fine if I decide to do something that is more about like pacifying and social and more charismatic. Those actions would be air. And so if I'm in a zone that basically that same card that I drew could have had a different resolution. So based on the place where I'm at, the actions I take may have better or worse chances of success. If I build a world that is very air-focused, then I expect to do a lot of interaction with the people there and talking with them. If I build a world that is very fire focused, expect to have a lot of violent conflict, and playing to the deck or using your own energy. So I also have my own elemental balance. And if I want to force my fire action to go through, I can actually take some of the fire out of my character and put it into the world to complete my action.
Yep.
And that permanently alters the balance of the world, but it also pushes through my abilities. So I can still be a character with a fire nature. And that character's actions will permanently upset the balance of the world around them if I force them to come to pass.
Because you are a literal godlike being, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's such a cool thing. I mean, like, everything about Mystic Empyrean is really cool. I've really wanted to run a game of Mystic Empyrean with you guys.
Well, we're talking about second edition. It's really just a matter of finding the time and energy to put that book together.
Yeah, that's true. We have we're juggling a lot of projects right now.
Yeah, exactly. But
Yeah.
Imperial's just about done. BattleCon's just about done. I really do want to sit down and make some role-playing games again. I'd like to bring that focus back. Because it was our original focus, level 99, was more about role-playing immersion.
Is it time? Is it time for the Indians role-playing game that you've started since college? Is it time?
I don't know. Like I said, there's so many things that I want to do in an RPG.
That's true.
I don't know that Indians is the right world to make a tech-assisted RPG, though. It's something I'd be interested in doing, but we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see.
That's fair, completely fair. I'm really interested to see what happens here. I've been wanting
Not
to
making any announcements here on the podcast.
No. None of these things that Brad has said are announcements. These are just Brad thoughts, right? Like this doesn't imply that there is an Indians RPG or that you're actually already made an RPG. It's just that you're gearing up to make one, right?
Well, I mean, I could say, yes, I did make one in college. It was basically Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition. And when 4th edition came out, I was like, oh, this is the same thing I've been working on. I guess I'll just, back off of this.
I see,
right?
I see.
And so, I've made other various things. I've got writings for an RPG for Indians, but it's very heavy. It's a lot more like Shadows of Esther than it is like Apocalypse World. And I don't know that I want to make a game like Shadows of Esther. And after reading it and seeing how much work and how much energy has to go into the maintenance of that huge game, I don't know that
That's
I
the
want
direction.
to inflict that on my players.
Okay.
Even if I may enjoy it.
Yeah, that's completely fair. I mean, like, some people might think they want the fully immersive Indians RPG, but when we release our third Indians cookbook, I think people realize that it might be a bit problematic that we're doing it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've really been wanting to make an RPG, and this is just a joke, but I actually kind of want to do it if I ever get, like, enough experience to even learn how to write an RPG. I really want to make a Filipino RPG about daily commutes.
About daily commutes?
Yep. Because commuting in the Philippines is wild.
That seems interesting. Like, you meet random strange people on the train?
Yeah, random strange people on the train, or maybe it's just like you're like you fantasize or fantasy the act of commuting, right? Like, so it's like, I don't know, you meet some sort of weird, strange alien Enderman, and you have to convince them to let you ride their weird boat so that you can get to the next bus stop, right? So it's like some magical.
This sounds a lot like Chubo's miraculous wish granting engine, actually.
Oh, okay. That means
Chubo's marvelous wish granting engine. You should check out that game.
Exactly. Now I need to check out that game.
Yeah, because those are the kind of scenes you get yourself involved in.
Oh,
that game.
That's wild! I love it. I love it.
It's very much like a Miyazaki movie.
Exactly. I basically wanted to make a Miyazaki movie about Philippine commutes. So you're on the money.
One game that you ought to check out too, if you like that kind of pastoral setting, is Golden Sky Stories.
Golden Sky Stories.
Yeah, this is published by a company called Starline. You are like animal spirit guides in Japan, in like rural Japan, and you live in a little shrine, and you go around town, and kids get lost, and you help them out. That kind of stuff.
That's cute.
It's super cute, and yeah, it's heartwarming. That's what they pitch it as, heartwarming role playing.
I love it. I really love wholesome role playing. The thing about it is that I really just love role playing more than the combat stuff. Like when I play D&D, I don't really enjoy the combat. I sometimes just create bad characters for the sake of creating bad characters. Like that's just the kind of person that I am.
The thing is that in D&D, real literature, if you have a character that's not good at combat, they're still doing interesting things during combat, right? They're like running around or hiding. Frodo and Bilbo are not good combat characters, but they have interesting things to do during a battle.
Yeah.
And in D&D, if you're not good at fighting, you're not that interesting. And in D&D, if you are good at fighting, you're still not that interesting.
Yeah.
Sadly
Which is why I just make characters, like, I just make characters that make it so that I can do something during combat that's fun. So, like, I make a thief who pretends he's a wizard, or I make a blind monk who has third eye person view, right? Like all of this stuff is just so that I can roleplay during combat, right? Because I don't want to be doing the combat. I want to be doing the role playing, guys. I don't want to just hand fist a bunch of dice and throw it, I
mean, there are games for that now, though. But you could just play Gloomhaven if you wanted to do that.
Exactly.
Right? Here's a game with no character generation and no character building. You just do tactical engagements over and over, and some people like it.
Yeah,
I mean, it's rated number 1 for a reason,
and that's fine, right? Like, I'm not saying I'm not saying people who like that are bad. I'm just saying that's not what I'm looking for in an RPG, right? And and I'm really excited for this new RPG that's not yet out, but it's coming out. It's called Maharlika, which is a really interesting thing because, okay, by default, if it's anything remotely Filipino related, I'm kind of interested because.
What does that translate to? That's a Tagalog word?
It is an old Tagalog word. It is not actually directly translatable. It is a caste in the old, like, pre-colonial society of the Philippines, which is essentially a warrior race. Or a warrior class of people in the tribe, right? So a Maharlika is basically a knight, right? And they serve under the Datu, which is essentially like a feudal lord, right? And then the Maharlika, their job is they essentially are folk hero-esque type people where they're kind of like good warriors and there's like an initiation rite and everything, but they're also slightly magical because they're blessed by the gods or something like that.
Yeah. Okay. It feels very, sort of Don Quixote, I guess.
Yeah, kind of like that. But here's the big twist. It is not a fantasy. It's not a fantasy.
So it is Don Quixote then.
Yeah, no, it's even more wild. It's a sci-fi RPG game, and they kind of like adapted that concept into modern time because now Maharlikas are actually sentient AI giant mech robots. Oh
no. Okay, this took a weird turn. This is like, okay, so it's got vampires, but actually the vampires are from space.
Space vampires. We're protecting...
I was like, okay, there's these knights and they're in the Philippines serving these feudal lords. Actually, they're giant mechs.
Actually, it's set in the modern time and the government has a Black Ops operation where they make giant mech AIs. I mean, look.
Seriously, it's like, you're not pulling my leg. This is the actual theme of the game.
I mean... here you go. I'll send you a picture right now. I'm not kidding you.
Wow.
I'm not kidding you.
Well, Marco, this is crazy, but I gotta get some dinner. Oh. It's late over here.
Well, Brad, go roll a d20 to check whether or not you can escape my grasp.
All right. I don't have one of those. I have to escape your grasp in order to get a d20.
All right. That's completely fair. So I'll let you. All right. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the New Level Cap podcast. As usual, if you love this episode, share it with a friend. If you hate it, share it with an enemy. It has been me, your host, Marco DeSantos, also known as Mechanic Rick, and with me has been my wonderful co-host, the Eidolon of game design himself,
Brad Talton. Thank you guys for joining us. And as always, happy gaming.
Thank you, World of Indians. Thank you, and good night.
The New Level Cap podcast is produced by Level 99 Games. Join us next Wednesday. Thank you for listening.